Hey Lang Nerds, welcome to Elang Explained. This video is part of our Writing Prep and Strategy series, where we break down the different sections of the English language exam to give you some tips and strategies on how best to approach the short answer, AC, and essay. Get excited for today's video, where we're going to be breaking down one section of the exam and talking about our best teacher-approved tips for success in English language. Today's video is all about Section A of the Elang exam. Worth 15 marks, we're talking about the short answer paper. In today's video, we're going to start off by talking through 3 strategies that you might like to start using when completing short answer papers. And in the second part of today's video, we're going to have a look at a sample short answer together, including unpacking the questions, looking at the marking guide, and talking through some sample responses. So, strategy number 1. When it comes to reading time, it's really important that you carefully read the short answer text. It sounds really obvious, doesn't it? Make sure to read the text. But when you're completing a short answer paper and you're in the moment, it's stressful. And we know that our brains sometimes miss key pieces of information when we're stressed. So we're recommending that anytime you complete a short answer paper, you read the text 3 times. Your first reading is for meaning. And so when you're reading the short answer text the first time, you're carefully considering what this text is actually about. When you're reading the short answer text the second time, you're aiming to identify the defining features of the set text, or the FERTAC. So on that second read, this is the time when you're asking yourself the question, can I identify the function or functions, the intents and purposes of the text, the register, the tenor, the audience, and the key contextual factors? Remembering, of course, that contextual factors gets further broken down into the cultural context of the text and the situational context that includes the mode, the tenor, the text type, and the setting. After you've read the text for meaning and to identify the FERTAC, now it's time to read the short answer questions, and then reread the short answer text one last time to identify the language features for the specific short answer questions. On this read, this is the time you're asking yourself the question, can I identify the language features that I will need to discuss in each short answer response? This is also the reading where you're starting to make some of those strategic choices about how you will selectively choose language features from the short answer text to discuss in each of the questions. Strategy number 2 is all around annotation. Now, some schools give annotation time when students encounter a short answer paper. But on the exam, you get 15 minutes of reading time and then you are straight into writing time. What we're suggesting is that you use the first 5 minutes of writing time to quickly annotate and mark up the short answer text. Color-coded annotations are, in our experience, the most effective way to do this. We know that most short answer papers, if they're worth 15 marks like it is on the exam, have between 5 to 6 questions. And so our suggestion is that you bring 6 differently colored highlighters into each short answer paper and color code your annotations so that when you start answering the questions, you can have a quick look, and if question 1 is highlighted in blue, go back to the short answer text and look for the evidence that you highlighted in blue earlier during annotation time to be able to quickly see which parts of the text you are using for each short answer question. The other great thing about quickly color code annotating your text is it allows you to see if you've missed any sections of the text. Now, we all know that for a short answer paper, you're not actually going to discuss every single language feature used in the short answer text. But if you've color coded your annotations and you actually notice that all of your annotations are within the first 50 lines of the text and you haven't identified any language features later on, it can be a really clear sign to you that you might just want to reread that second part of the text or the part of the text that doesn't have any annotations to make sure that you haven't missed any key language features. And our last strategy is around writing time. Like I said earlier, when we're completing short answer papers, for most of us, our brains are pretty stressed, and we know that brains sometimes miss key information when they're feeling stressed. So before you answer any short answer question, make sure to take a big deep breath and then carefully consider how many questions the short answer question is worth, so the mark allocation, the command term that is given, remembering that there is a difference between discussing the effect of a language feature and analysing the use of a specific language feature. And lastly, carefully considering the number of examples that are required for each short answer question. There are a few things more heartbreaking than when a question asks students to provide 2 examples and they only provide 1. And so that response, unfortunately, can't get full marks. Equally, it's always really difficult when a question asks students for 2 examples and they provide 3. Remember that your teachers can only mark the first 2 examples if the question asks for 2 examples. They can't mark the third. And what's even more heartbreaking is when students have done this and they've written 3 examples and the first one is accurate and correct and detailed and nuanced, but the second one is incorrect and the third one is correct. Unfortunately, teachers can only mark the first and second example because the question has only asked for 2 examples. So make sure that you're never providing more detail than a short answer question asks of you. Okay, with strategies out of the way, it's time for us to jump into our worked example for today. So, the following text is taken from the BirdLife Australia website, which is the organisation that, in addition to aiming to stop bird extinctions in Australia, actually runs the biannual Bird of the Year competition, which is going to happen later on this year. And if you're not around Bird of the Year, make sure you get around it by the time the competition starts in 2025 or 2027, depending on when you're watching this video. Because every Australian is actually able to vote for Australia's Bird of the Year. And it's a great competition to be a part of to learn more about the different bird species across Australia. I'm going to give you a moment to have a look at this text and the 5 short answer questions that are listed on screen. Remember to read this text 3 times. The first time, you're thinking about what the key ideas in this text are. The second time, you're aiming to identify those elements of the FERTAC. And the third time, you're looking carefully at these short answer questions, thinking about whether you can identify the language features in the text that are required to answer each of these short answer questions. Okay, after a little bit of reading time, let's talk through these questions. Now, you can see on screen that I have color-coded my short answer text. So question 1 is all about the function of lines 3 to 4. Now, it's really important for this question that we're only looking between lines 3 to 4 because it gives us a line range. If we were to use any other example from the text, it cannot receive full marks. Question 2 is about 2 different sentence structures. So I already know I need to be looking in this text for 2 sentence structures and they need to be different. Remember here, sentence structures include fragments, simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. The third short answer question here is asking how 2 different language features reinforce BirdLife's expertise in the text. And the keen green beans out there will have noticed that this question is actually a purpose and intent question because reinforcing expertise is a formal purpose suggested in the study design. Question 4 is about how 2 different language features reflect the register. And these questions are a little bit sneaky because they actually ask you to talk about 2 different examples, but you also have to get that full 4 out of 4, identify the register of the text correctly. So you're kind of doing 3 different things for 4 marks. And our last short answer question, the 5 marker, which, let's be real, are my favorite short answer questions, asks you about how language features reinforce cohesion in the text. Now, this kind of question is one that has definitely been asked in VCAR exams before. And there's a little bit of a trick here because sometimes we see coherence and cohesion together, and sometimes students get tripped up about the differences between coherence and cohesion. This question is specifically asking you about cohesion, not coherence. And so this is this place for you to really focus your analysis on those language features listed in cohesion, his car crashed, as opposed to the elements of coherence, flick. Now, I'm going to give you a moment to answer each of these short answer questions. Remember, Lang nerds, that for a VCAR 3-4 E-Lang exam, our timings are 1.6 minutes per mark. So if you were going to do this to exam times, you would actually pause this video and take the next 24 minutes to answer each of these short answer questions in full sentences, with examples, with line numbers. Remember, no line numbers means no marks for your example. Okay, after a little bit of writing time, it's time to talk through the marking guide. Now, the way this discussion is going to work is, as you can see on the slide, I've got the suggested marking guide, and then we're going to talk through a sample response. So, question 1, identify the function of lines 3 to 4 and it's worth 1 mark. So to get full marks for this question, you needed to correctly identify the function of lines 3 to 4 as referential. Now, this question doesn't ask you for an example of language from the text. So it's totally fine if you've written the dot point referential. It's a more strategic choice, though, to write referential out in a full sentence. If you've given an example, this is where things get a little bit complicated. Because if your example supports a referential function and the meta-language is correct and you've got line numbers, you can still absolutely get that full mark. But if your meta-language is incorrect on that example, if it's not accurate, then unfortunately here, you would lose that 1 mark even if you've got the function accurate. So there's a trick to E-Lang short answer questions, and it's important to remember that if a response contains any incorrect information, it actually can't get full marks. So if you're one of those students who's given more information than is required here, and some of that information is wrong, then you've actually cost yourself the mark. Make sure to only provide the level of detail that each question asks of you. And you can see here our sample response. The functions of lines 3 to 4 is referential. Doesn't give any more information than is required. Take a moment now and give yourself a mark out of 1 for your short answer. Question 2, comment on the use of 2 different sentence structures. This question's worth 2 marks, and so to receive those full 2 marks, your response needed to, number 1, identify 1 sentence structure present in the text and quote this with line numbers. Then, number 2, explain the effect of using this sentence structure. So how is the use of this sentence structure impacting this specific text? Then you needed to identify a different sentence structure present in the text and again, quote this with line numbers. Then explain the effect of using this sentence structure. Now, let's be honest, this is a difficult question because it's only worth 2 marks, but this question could easily be worth 4 marks because it's asking you to do 4 things for these 2 marks. In terms of the marking allocation, overall, you would get 1 mark for correctly identifying 2 different sentence structures, and then 1 mark overall for your explanation of those sentence structures. This is a really tricky question because if you've correctly identified your first sentence structure and said that, for example, there is a simple sentence used, but you've incorrectly identified your second sentence structure, you've labeled the sentence complex when it's really compound because you've gotten tricked by those conjunctions, then you couldn't get that full mark. Now, like I said earlier, sentence structures include fragment sentences, simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. So you've got a couple of options to choose from when you're thinking about what meta language you're going to apply to this question. Let's have a look at a sample response together. BirdLife Australia uses the simple sentence, BirdLife Australia's mission is to save birds, line 1, as a heading to clearly state the mission of the company to protect birds and signpost the key idea of the webpage. Whereas the complex sentence, our birds are facing growing threats like climate change, fire, habitat loss, and predation by introduced species, which is why we're stepping up our conservation efforts across the country, 7 to 9, to first list the threats that the birds are experiencing, and then state the response to these threats by BirdLife Australia using the subordinating conjunction which, line 8, to separate the independent clause from the dependent clause. Now, this response is going to get those 2 full marks because number 1, it's correctly identified the 2 different sentence structures. We've got a simple sentence and a complex sentence. It's also going to pick up that 2nd mark for the explanation of what these language features are doing. Now, this response is definitely super detailed. To be honest, it's probably more detailed than you need to be, particularly because you're only able to get 2 marks for this short answer question. But we've got a sentence that talks about the effect of using a simple sentence, that it's clearly communicating the mission of the country to protect birds, and a sentence about the effect of using the complex sentence, that it first talks about the threats the birds are experiencing, and it then talks about BirdLife Australia's response to those threats. Question 3. Explain how 2 different language features reinforce BirdLife's expertise in the text. Now, this is that sneaky purpose question from before. But in terms of the mark allocation, these 3 marks are much clearer than the last question that was only worth 2 marks. To get full marks here, your response needs to, number 1, identify 1 language feature in the text, and quote an example of this with line numbers, and explain how this language feature reinforces BirdLife's expertise in a specific field. Now, the really obvious field for this text that BirdLife have expertise in is, of course, bird conservation. Then you need to identify a 2nd language feature, quote an example with line numbers, and again, explain how this language feature reinforces BirdLife's expertise in a specific field. This is a sneaky purpose question. And because it's a sneaky purpose question, it's really important to remember to always extend your purpose. In the VCAST study design, purposes and intents are listed. And this is a great starting point when we're thinking about purposes and intents of a text. But remember that what's listed in the study design should be treated as sentence starters. And so when we think about reinforcing expertise, the way we extend this sentence starter is by talking about which specific field that expertise is in. So let's have a look at a sample response together. BirdLife's expertise in the field of wildlife conservation is reinforced through the use of the jargonistic noun phrases and euphemisms. On line 10, BirdLife used the jargonistic noun phrase bird conservation strategy, 10, to refer to the specific actions that BirdLife will take to protect Australian birds. Through the use of this jargon, BirdLife are able to reinforce their authority in the field of wildlife conservation through signalling to the audience that they have a detailed strategy to protect Australian birds. So in terms of marks, this response would get a solid 1 mark for that use of the jargonistic noun phrases in this first example. And there's clear explanation of the effect of using this jargon. Let's have a look at a sample response together. BirdLife's expertise in the field of wildlife conservation is reinforced through the use of jargonistic noun phrases and euphemisms. Now, it's not essential to have a topic sentence for a 3-mark response, but it can be useful to clearly signpost at the beginning of a short answer response the key language features that you're going to be discussing. Now, this first part of the response talks about the use of the jargonistic noun phrase bird conservation strategy on line 10. And you can see that this response is said on line 10 and then put 10 in brackets afterwards to signal that this example is from line 10. It's really important to always signal the line number that every example comes from. But it's not essential to say on line 10 and then have 10 in brackets. A more strategic choice here would be to choose one of those options. In the second part of this response, it talks about how expertise is further reinforced through the use of the euphemism bird declines, which is negotiating the taboo of bird death and extinction through a more ambiguous phrase. Now, it's really important anytime we talk about euphemism or dysphemism and we're linking that to negotiation of taboo, that we're really specific about which taboo is being negotiated through either the euphemism or dysphemism. And so here, bird declines is a euphemistic phrase that is talking about that taboo of bird death and extinction in Australia. This response is going to score a solid 3 out of 3. Because for each of the examples that they present, there's really clear use of meta-language. So we've got jargonistic noun, we've got euphemism. So we've got 2 different language features clearly identified, quoted with line numbers. It's going to pick up the other marks for this question because it clearly explains the effect of using these language features. So for that jargon, clearly explaining what the jargonistic noun phrase refers to, and for the euphemism, explaining which taboo is being negotiated. Then this response moves into fully answering the question and stating how it reinforces BirdLife's expertise in the particular field. And you'll notice here that this response for both examples has spoken about reinforcing authority in the field of wildlife conservation. Now, for this question, you absolutely could have identified 2 different fields that BirdLife reinforce their own expertise in, as long as there's that clear explanation of how the language feature you've chosen reinforces that expertise. Make sure to take a moment now and give yourself a mark out of 3 for this short answer question. Question 4. Discuss how 2 different language features reflect the register of the text. Now, this is a sneaky register question. In fact, all questions like this, I think, are sneaky register questions. Because here, to get the full 4 marks, your response actually has to do 5 things. Number 1, you needed to accurately identify the register of the text as formal. And then it's pretty much the same structure as the last 2 short answer questions in this paper. You needed to identify a formal language feature and quote this with meta-language. You needed to identify 1 formal language feature and quote this with line numbers. Then explain how the use of this feature reflects formality in the text. After you've done that, it's a rinse and repeat. You've got to identify a second formal language feature and again, quote this with line numbers. Then explain how the use of this feature reflects formality in the text. Now, my biggest tip when analysing register within any text is to go back to the VCAST study design, because the English language VCAST study design actually lists some of the language features that can reflect informality and formality. For this question, we're focused on that formal register, and so we would be using the list from the study design of rhetoric, jargon, subsystem patterning, euphemism, non-discriminatory language, and doublespeak. A really easy way to remember this list from the study design is the mnemonic RJ-CENT. So let's have a look at a sample response. Now, just like the previous short answer question, a topic sentence isn't essential or required for this question, but it can be really useful to help us organize our thoughts and to clearly signal which language features we're going to discuss and identify the register of the text. So here we've got the topic sentence, BirdLife Australia uses listing, a form of subsystem patterning, and nominalization, a different form of subsystem patterning, to reflect the formal register of this text. Now, for any question on register, it is absolutely not essential to focus on just patterning like this response has done. Theoretically, you could use any element of RJ-CENT as long as it appears in the set text and you feel comfortable and confident unpacking its effect on the register. So, this response, to get those full marks after correctly identifying the register, we would need to have 2 clear identifications of different examples. So we've got the listing on line 21, experts and organizations, communities and landholders, which is really clear listing. And then we need to explain how the use of listing reinforces the register. To get the second set of marks for this question, you then need to discuss a second language feature. Here, they've used the nominalization of deforestation. Now, of course, deforestation is the noun. The verb would be to deforest, which is the act of cutting down trees. And then talk about how the use of this specific language feature supports register. In this response, you can see that the way we've done that is by linking to a formal purpose. And this can be a really good strategy when you're talking about how language creates or reflects a register of the text. Because here, in that first part of the response, they're talking about how the listing is able to clarify information about the different groups that BirdLife are supported by in conservation, therefore increasing formality within the text. And in the second example, discuss how the use of the nominalization is able to negotiate the taboo of cutting down forests by placing emphasis on the action instead of the specific individuals and groups who are removing these trees. Make sure to give yourself a mark out of 4 now for your short answer response. Question 5. Using appropriate meta-language, analyze how language features reinforce cohesion in the text. Now, this question is worth 5 marks, and so that means that it's marked holistically. The challenge for any holistically marked short answer question is that there's not a checklist anymore. With the first 4 questions of this short answer paper, there was a really clear checklist for you to have a look at as part of the marking guide. But for a 5-mark question, we're considering the response as a whole. And so that means these types of questions, instead of having a really clear checklist for us to make sure we've got all of the key facts listed, instead will be assessed against a table that looks kind of like this. And just like with the AC or the essay, we've got a band and then expected qualities. For this question, if your response doesn't identify the elements of cohesion, or it's able to identify elements of cohesion in the text, but it doesn't provide clear explanation of how these language features support cohesion, it might be in the 0 to 1 mark band. If your response is identifying 1 or 2 elements of cohesion and starting to explain how these language features support cohesion of the text, then it might be in the 2 to 3 mark band. To get into that 4 to 5 mark band though, we're looking for a response that has a clear structure and provides detailed and nuanced analysis of the ways that 3 language features support cohesion in the text. Now, it is absolutely possible to push into that 4 to 5 mark band if your response has that clear structure, detailed and nuanced analysis of 2 language features. But for a 5-mark response, the strategic choice is always to aim for 3 language features to give yourself the best chance at having that nuanced and detailed analysis. Now, the elements of cohesion that you could have spoken about for this question include hyperonymy, information flow that includes front focus, end focus, and clefting, substitution, conjunctions, adverbials, referencing, but you can be more specific here and talk about anaphoric or cataphoric referencing, collocation, repetition, antonymy, synonymy, hyponymy, ellipses, or diacritic reference. Which, of course, we remember using that mnemonic, his car crashed. Let's have a look at a sample response together. So, you can see that just like the last 2 questions, this response begins with a really clear topic sentence. Now, once again, it's not essential to begin with a clear topic sentence, but we think they're a really good strategic choice to help set up the structure of your response and really clearly signal to your teacher the language features that you're going to be talking about in your 5-mark response. We also think that having a topic sentence like this, particularly for a 5-mark response, can be really useful when you go back and edit your work, because it gives you that checklist of the 3 things that you are aiming to talk about. So while you're editing, you can reread your topic sentence and then think to yourself, okay, does my response actually talk about these 3 key ideas? Now, in this response, we're looking for detailed, nuanced, and sustained analysis. So we've got sustained because it's got those 3 elements here. It's detailed because we've got clear identification of the 3 different language features. We've got anaphoric referencing on lines 16 and 17. Hyponymy with the hyponyms protect, restore, and help from lines 25 and 26. And then repetition of a pronoun. Now, in this last example, repetition is the element of cohesion. This response uses pronoun as an additional piece of meta-language to support the discussion. It's really important if you're going to do this, though, if you're going to double your meta-language, that the discussion of language features, the language features you're discussing, are directly related to the short answer question. So because here we're talking about repetition of a pronoun, our discussion has to focus on repetition because that is the element of cohesion. If the discussion of the language feature actually focused on the use of the pronoun our, then this section of the response doesn't actually address the question anymore because pronouns aren't a part of cohesion. So take a moment and give yourself now a mark out of 5 for your short answer response. That's all we have time for today. Remember to be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time for more